The final report landed on Grand Councillor Vexillarius Flumpknot's desk with all the ceremonial weight of 9 centuries worth of absolutely catastrophic scientific methodology, bound in what appeared to be crystallized bureaucracy and sealed with the official stamp of the Department of Xenobiological Misunderstandings. It represented the most comprehensive study of human civilization ever attempted by an advanced galactic society. It was also, as it turned out, the most spectacularly wrong document in the recorded history of interstellar academia. Professor Bumbershoot Twiddleplonk cleared his 17 throats simultaneously as he prepared to present his magnum opus to the assembled Grand Council. His research team, consisting of Dr. Flibble Snatch Wobblebonk, Senior Analyst Grimbleboop Snurfington, and Junior Researcher Piddlewisk Binglefrump, stood behind him with the kind of academic pride that comes from spending nearly a millennium getting everything completely backwards. "Esteemed colleagues of the 47 worlds," Twiddleplonk announced, his voice carrying across the vast crystalline chamber like a foghorn having delusions of intellectual grandeur. "After 900 years of meticulous observation, exhaustive analysis, and peer-reviewed documentation, I present to you the definitive classification of species designation Terra Prime Alpha 7, colloquially known as humans." The assembled representatives leaned forward with anticipation. Delegates from the Centauri Academic Consortium, the Betelgeuse Institute of Higher Learning, and the prestigious University of Rigel Prime had all gathered to hear the conclusions about Earth's dominant life form. What they received instead was a masterwork of misinterpretation that would have made a comedy writer weep tears of pure joy. Dr. Wobblebonk stepped forward, clutching a data tablet the size of a small refrigerator. "Our research conclusively demonstrates that humans are a primitive tribal species whose entire social structure revolves around the ritualistic worship of small, furry, four-legged creatures they refer to as cats." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. In the diplomatic section, Ambassador Quizzlebottom from the Andromeda Trade Federation nearly choked on his photosynthetic supplements. "Furthermore," continued Professor Twiddleplonk, adjusting his collection of ceremonial viewing apparatus, "humans engage in daily combat rituals, where they gather in massive underground caverns to battle metal beasts on wheels while consuming liquid stimulants. They call this sacred practice commuting." Senior Analyst Snurfington consulted his notes, which appeared to be written on what looked like processed tree matter. "If I may add, Professor, our surveillance indicates that humans spend approximately 42% of their existence staring into rectangular light sources, presumably receiving divine visions from their cat overlords through a complex system of moving pictures and mystical algorithms." The audience buzzed with a mixture of fascination and horror. How had such an advanced research team gotten everything so fundamentally wrong? The answer, as would soon become painfully apparent, lay in their research methodology. The Intergalactic Council had been intercepting Earth's digital transmissions for 9 centuries, but due to what could only be described as the most unfortunate calibration error in the history of xenobiology, they had been receiving exclusively data from a narrow temporal window between 2005 and 2012. Even worse, their translation matrices had somehow concluded that internet cat videos were religious documentaries, social media platforms were governmental institutions, and YouTube comments represented humanity's most sophisticated philosophical discourse. "Hold on just a galactic second," interrupted Councillor Blimpington Father Squash, his 12 independently operating vocal cords creating a harmonious cacophony of confusion. "Are you seriously telling this assembly that we've based our understanding of an entire planetary civilization on what exactly?" Professor Twiddleplonk shuffled through his research materials nervously, producing what appeared to be printouts from something called BuzzFeed. "Well, primarily we utilized comprehensive databases including Which Harry Potter House Are You?, Farmville, and extensive documentation from a theological institution called World of Warcraft. And we have detailed analyses of their mating rituals from a scholarly journal entitled Top 10 Celebrity Breakups That Broke Our Hearts. The silence that followed was so profound that you could have heard a quantum particle having an identity crisis. It was at this precise moment that junior researcher Piddlewisk Binglefrump, fresh from the Academy of Theoretical Xenobiology and still young enough to possess the dangerous quality of common sense, raised a tentative appendage. Professors, forgive my inexperience, but shouldn't we perhaps attempt direct communication with the subjects before classifying them as a potential threat to galactic stability? The suggestion was so radically obvious, so fundamentally reasonable, that it caused 3 senior researchers to experience simultaneous academic seizures and prompted one elderly counselor to molt prematurely. Direct contact with research subjects, unthinkable, but Binglefrump had planted a seed of doubt that would grow into a mighty tree of embarrassing realization. What if they were wrong? What if humans weren't actually cat-worshipping cave-dwellers who communicated exclusively through emoji hieroglyphics and rage-quit tantrums? Against all established protocol, academic tradition, and basic common sense, the Council voted to initiate first contact. The preparation phase was, to employ a technical term, an unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. Based on their exhaustive research, the contact team prepared culturally appropriate gifts including premium cat food, energy drinks in flavors called Mountain Dew Code Red, and what they believed to be sacred human artifacts, something called crocs, and devices known as fidget spinners. They practiced their greeting protocols in what they had determined was the universal human language, which turned out to be a bewildering combination of leet-speak, auto-tuned vocalizations, and what appeared to be the battle cries of various online gaming communities. Ambassador Higgledy-Piggledy Pomplebottom, selected for his expertise in primitive cultures after his successful negotiations with the bureaucratic Vogons, was chosen to lead the historic First Contact mission. He spent weeks mastering human customs, which according to their database included ritualistic activities called planking, flash mobbing, and something called rickrolling that they believed was a form of psychological warfare. When their vessel finally descended through Earth's atmospheric layers, they chose what their research indicated was humanity's most sacred location, a place called Times Square in a settlement known as New York City. According to their analysis, this was where humans congregated to worship their electronic deities and engage in primitive capitalistic rituals while consuming overpriced sustenance. The landing did not proceed according to their carefully laid plans. For starters, the ship's arrival triggered every car alarm within a 12-block radius, creating an auditory assault that sounded like a symphony of mechanical banshees having a collective nervous breakdown. The humans, instead of prostrating themselves in worship as the research predicted, mostly just extracted small, rectangular devices and began recording the proceedings with the casual indifference of beings who had clearly seen stranger things during their morning commute. Ambassador Pomplebottom emerged from the vessel wearing what his cultural advisors assured him was traditional human formal attire, a sequined tracksuit, sandals with socks, and a baseball cap positioned at what they believed was the ceremonially significant angle of 45 degrees. He had rehearsed his greeting speech for months. "Salutations, fellow humans!" he bellowed through his universal translation device, which unfortunately had been programmed using YouTube comment sections and made him sound like he was simultaneously shouting and asking a question while gargling mouthwash. "We approach in peaceful intentions and bearing gifts of, he consulted his ceremonial notes. "Hot pockets and energy beverages. Please accept these offerings and direct us to your supreme leader, the great influencer who commands the algorithm." The assembled crowd of humans stared at him with the kind of bewildered fascination typically reserved for watching someone try to eat soup with a fork. A voice from the back called out, "Is this performance art?" This was decidedly not proceeding according to protocol. Dr. Flibblesnatch Wobblebonk emerged from the ship carrying what appeared to be a ceremonial vessel filled with an assortment of Skittles, energy drinks, and what the research team believed were sacred communication totems known as smartphones. We understand that your species communicates primarily through interpretive movement patterns and the ritualistic sharing of images depicting small mammals in amusing situations. We have prepared extensive documentation. What followed could only be described as the most magnificently awkward first contact in the recorded annals of interstellar diplomacy. The aliens attempted to demonstrate their cultural understanding through what appeared to be interpretive dance moves that looked like a combination of the Macarena, someone experiencing severe gastric distress, and a malfunctioning robot attempting to perform ballet. They displayed holographic images of what they believed represented Earth's most revered creatures: keyboard cats, dancing hamsters, and something called Grumpy Cat, which they had classified as a deceased religious figure. The humans, meanwhile, were having the entertainment experience of their lives. This was infinitely better than any street performance they had ever witnessed. Someone initiated a live broadcast, and within minutes, hashtags like Jacques Alien Dance Party and Jacques First Contact Fail were trending across every social media platform on the planet. Detective Rosa Martinez of the NYPD, assigned to crowd control duties, finally stepped forward. She was a 28-year veteran who had witnessed everything from flash mobs to people claiming to be time travelers, from the future selling lottery tickets. This situation, however, represented uncharted territory, even for her extensive experience with urban oddities. "Excuse me," she said, speaking slowly and clearly as if addressing someone with a severe head injury. "Are you genuinely extraterrestrial beings?" Ambassador Pumplebottom practically vibrated with excitement, his universal translator making him sound like an overly caffeinated chipmunk. "Affirmative, human female entity. We are official representatives of the Intergalactic Council of Advanced Civilizations. We have conducted extensive studies of your species for 900 of your planetary rotations. We possess comprehensive knowledge of your sacred rituals, including twerking, dabbing, and the worship of the almighty bacon." Rosa blinked slowly, the way one does when reality decides to take an unexpected vacation. What exactly?" And thus began the terrible, wonderful truth's emergence from the depths of academic incompetence. Dr. Wobblebonk produced his research tablet, which was approximately the size of a small vehicle, and emitted various beeping sounds whenever touched, as if protesting its own existence. "According to our comprehensive studies, humans dedicate most of their conscious hours to engaging in tribal warfare over something called shipping relationships, participate in ancient ceremonial practices called planking and ice bucket challenges, and maintain religious faith in small green amphibians possessing mystical wisdom." "You mean memes?" asked a college student in the crowd who had been live streaming the entire encounter to her TikTok followers. "Memes, precisely," shouted Professor Twiddleplonk, who had emerged from the ship wearing what appeared to be a toga constructed entirely from bubble wrap and aluminum foil. "We have conducted exhaustive analysis of your meme culture. We understand that this Pepe the Frog entity serves as your primary spiritual guide, that Rick Astley functions as some manner of trickster deity, and that the ritual of Rick rolling represents a form of benevolent psychological manipulation designed to strengthen tribal bonds." The crowd erupted in laughter, so genuine and sustained that it actually registered on nearby seismographs. Rosa rubbed her temples, feeling the onset of a headache that would require prescription-strength medication and possibly early retirement. "Let me attempt to understand this situation. she said, with the patience of someone who had spent decades dealing with the inexplicable. "You've been studying our species for 9 centuries, and your conclusion is that we worship internet memes." "Exactly!" the aliens chorused in perfect unison, clearly delighted that someone was finally grasping the profound insights of their research. Junior researcher Binglefrump, who had been observing from the ship's entrance with growing concern, was beginning to suspect that something was catastrophically wrong with their entire research framework. The humans weren't behaving like primitive cat-worshipping warriors. They weren't demanding tribute in the form of energy drinks. Nobody had mentioned bacon even once, despite it allegedly being central to their religious beliefs. If I may interject," he ventured, approaching Detective Martinez with his universal translator calibrated to maximum politeness, "I'm beginning to suspect we may have encountered some significant errors in our research methodology. Could you perhaps illuminate what humans actually engage in during their typical daily existence?" Rosa looked at the nervous young alien with something approaching maternal sympathy. "Well, mostly we work jobs that we tolerate at best. Worry about financial obligations, attempt to maintain meaningful relationships, consume entertainment content, engage in political discussions of varying civility, and try to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with our lives." The alien research team exchanged confused glances that somehow managed to be visible despite their radically different facial structures. This description bore absolutely no resemblance to their accumulated data. "But what about the great tribal conflicts of Facebook?" inquired Dr. Wobblebonk with genuine bewilderment. "Oh, you mean arguing with relatives about politics? Yeah, we do that. And the ritualistic consumption of pumpkin-flavored beverages during the autumnal season? Pumpkin spice lattes. Some people enjoy them, sure. The sacred choreography of the single ladies? That's just a Beyoncé song." The aliens stood in stunned silence as 9 centuries of meticulous research crumbled around them like a sandcastle in a hurricane built by someone who had never seen sand and was working from a description written by someone who was legally blind. Everything they believed they understood about humanity was not merely wrong, it was spectacularly, hilariously, monumentally incorrect. Junior researcher Binglefrump was frantically documenting this revelation. "So you're indicating that humans are not a primitive warrior civilization obsessed with dairy products?" "Well," interjected a voice from the crowd, "I do really love cheese." "And there," Professor Twiddleplonk exclaimed triumphantly, pointing with what appeared to be a telescoping appendage, "observe, the dairy obsession is validated." "Dude, everyone loves cheese," the human replied with a shrug. "That's not specifically a human thing. Cheese is just objectively delicious." And this revelation, that humans were actually remarkably similar to most other intelligent species in their appreciation of fermented dairy products, was somehow more shocking to the researchers than if they had discovered humans could manipulate gravity with their thoughts and communicate through interpretive dance. The mundane was mystifying, the ordinary was extraordinary. Dr. Wobblebonk was experiencing what could only be described as a complete academic nervous breakdown. "But our research, our peer-reviewed publications, our tenure positions," Detective Martinez, meanwhile, was contemplating how exactly she would file an incident report about this encounter. "Responded to noise complaint, found aliens, aliens confused about human culture, situation resolved through basic conversation and reality checking." She doubted her sergeant would find this explanation satisfactory. The crowd, which had expanded to encompass several city blocks, was now treating the entire situation like the world's most bizarre street festival. Food vendors had materialized as if summoned by the prospect of captive audiences. Someone had established a DJ setup. The aliens were posing for selfies with anyone who requested photographic documentation. Ambassador Pumplebottom was experiencing his own crisis of professional confidence. He had dedicated decades to studying what he believed were humanity's intricate social customs, only to discover that most of them were either satirical content, marketing campaigns, or phenomena that had lasted approximately 15 minutes of internet fame before being forgotten entirely. So the Harlem Shake phenomenon wasn't actually a religious ceremony, he inquired hopefully. No, that was just a viral video trend that died out really quickly, explained a helpful bystander. And the double rainbow sighting wasn't a divine revelation. YouTube video. The guy was probably having a really good day. What about the ice bucket challenge? Charity fundraising that got out of hand. With each explanation, the aliens' carefully constructed understanding of human civilization underwent further demolition. It was like watching a Jenga tower collapse in slow motion. If the Jenga tower had been constructed by someone who had never encountered the concept of structural engineering and was working from instructions written in a language they didn't speak. But here's where the narrative takes an unexpected turn, because while the aliens were experiencing the complete dissolution of their worldview, the humans were beginning to conduct their own study. Detective Martinez, in particular, had begun asking increasingly pointed questions. "So you represent an intergalactic council?" she inquired of Binglefrump, who seemed to possess the most functional reasoning capabilities among the group. "Oh, absolutely. We represent 47 distinct species across 12 separate galactic clusters. Our organization is quite prestigious." He inflated with pride, his translator making him sound like an enthusiastic hamster. "And you spent 900 years studying humans without ever attempting direct communication." Binglefrump deflated considerably. "Well, when you phrase it in those terms, it does seem rather methodologically questionable." Martinez exchanged meaningful glances with Dr. Rebecca Holloway, a cultural anthropologist from NYU, who had arrived after monitoring the news coverage. "And how do you typically conduct studies of other species?" "Oh, identical methodology, remote observation, data compilation, theoretical modeling. It's all very rigorous." Binglefrump seemed to be attempting to convince himself as much as his audience. Dr. Holloway leaned forward with professional interest. "And what's your success rate with these studies?" There ensued a pause of such profound duration and uncomfortable implications that it could have been measured in geological epochs. "Well," Binglefrump admitted reluctantly, "there was that situation with the Betelgeusians." "What situation?" Martinez asked, though she suspected she might not want to know the answer. "We conducted 3 centuries of observation and concluded they were a species of highly intelligent gaseous entities. It transpired they were merely experiencing persistent atmospheric conditions. The actual Betelgeusians lived in underground cities and considered us incredibly rude for completely ignoring their attempts at communication." Dr. Holloway and Martinez looked at each other with the dawning realization that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "How frequently has this type of misunderstanding occurred?" "Define frequently," Binglefrump responded weakly. "The truth, as it emerged through increasingly uncomfortable conversations, was that the Intergalactic Council's Department of Xenobiology maintained a success rate that would make random chance look like precision engineering. They had classified crystal formations as sentient beings, categorized an entire species of space-dwelling cetaceans as dangerous predators because they kept colliding with research vessels. The cetaceans were actually attempting to initiate playful interactions, and had once invested 50 years trying to establish diplomatic relations with what ultimately proved to be a particularly sophisticated screensaver program. "Sweet mother of cosmic irony," exclaimed Dr. Holloway. "How do you people manage to operate an intergalactic anything?" Professor Twiddleplonk, who had been listening to this conversation with mounting horror, finally interjected. "I'll have you understand that the Department of Xenobiology maintains extremely rigorous peer review standards." "Reviewed by whom?" asked Martinez. "Other xenobiologists." Who maintain the same success rate you do? Well, yes, but they're certified experts. The circular logic was so perfect, so absolutely impenetrable in its complete disconnection from reality, that several humans in the crowd actually began applauding. It was like witnessing a masterclass in intellectual self-deception performed by beings with advanced degrees. Dr. Holloway, however, was beginning to perceive a fascinating opportunity. As a cultural anthropologist, she dedicated her professional life to studying how different human cultures understood and misunderstood each other. This was essentially the same phenomenon, but with additional tentacles and universal translation devices. "Tell me," she said to Binglefrump, "what represents the most successful interspecies contact your council has ever achieved." Binglefrump brightened considerably, his various sensory appendages practically glowing with enthusiasm. "Oh, that would definitely be the Zorbonians, absolutely wonderful beings. We established comprehensive diplomatic relations, extensive trade agreements, cultural exchange programs. It was considered a textbook example of successful first contact." "How did you manage to achieve that success?" "Well, we dispatched Ambassador Flibbergibbet to their homeworld, and he immediately became completely lost in their capital city. He wandered around for 3 days in a state of total confusion until a local merchant took pity on him and invited him to share a meal. As it turned out, becoming lost and requiring assistance is considered the highest possible honor in Zorbonian culture. They interpreted our confusion as an incredibly respectful demonstration of humility and vulnerability. The irony was so dense, it could have been used as a building material. Their most successful diplomatic mission had occurred entirely by accident, when they had done precisely the opposite of following their careful protocols and extensive preparation. Martinez was beginning to understand something profound. "So your most successful diplomatic achievement happened when you abandoned all your research and just acted like confused tourists?" Yes, that's exactly what occurred. The implications were staggering. The Intergalactic Council's greatest triumph had resulted from embracing ignorance and confusion rather than pretending to possess expertise they demonstrably lacked. Dr. Holloway was practically vibrating with academic excitement. "This is absolutely fascinating. You've created an entire bureaucratic system based on the assumption that understanding other cultures is achievable through remote observation, when in reality, successful communication requires acknowledging that you don't understand and need help." Ambassador Pomplebottom appeared to be experiencing an existential crisis of cosmic proportions. "But if we don't understand anything about anyone, how do we formulate policies? How do we make administrative decisions? How do we maintain cosmic order?" "Maybe," suggested a philosophy professor who had joined the growing crowd, "the objective isn't to understand everything completely. Maybe the goal is to remain curious and continue asking questions." This concept was so radically foreign to beings who had spent millennia attempting to categorize and classify every aspect of the known universe that it caused several researchers to experience what could only be described as academic vertigo. The idea that confusion might be more valuable than certainty was like suggesting that gravity worked upward and mathematics was actually a type of interpretive dance. But there was something profoundly liberating about this revelation. If they didn't need to be experts on everything, if they could admit ignorance without losing professional credibility, then perhaps they could actually learn something genuine and meaningful. Binglefrump was the first to embrace this revolutionary philosophy. "So if I understand correctly, the secret to successful interspecies relations is admitting that we have absolutely no idea what we're doing and asking for guidance." "Pretty much, yeah," said Martinez with a grin that somehow managed to be both amused and sympathetic. "But that's terrible. We're supposed to be advanced. We're supposed to possess comprehensive knowledge." "According to whom?" asked Dr. Holloway. There followed another of those pregnant pauses that indicated someone's entire worldview was undergoing fundamental reconstruction. I actually don't know, Binglefrump admitted, and with that simple admission, something shifted dramatically. Not just for Binglefrump, but for the entire assembled group of aliens and humans. They were all just conscious beings, attempting to figure things out, making mistakes, experiencing confusion, and muddling through existence as best they could manage. The crowd had expanded to fill several city blocks by this point. News vehicles, food vendors, street performers, and curious onlookers had transformed Times Square into an impromptu festival celebrating interspecies confusion. Entrepreneurial individuals had begun selling merchandise with slogans like, "I survived first contact and all I got was this lousy re-examination of my fundamental assumptions about the nature of understanding," and "My parents were abducted by aliens and all they brought back were questions, but the most significant revelation was yet to come." Dr. Wobblebonk, who had been quietly consulting her research databases with increasing agitation, suddenly emitted a sound that resembled a caffeinated pterodactyl experiencing technical difficulties. "Colleagues, I have just discovered something absolutely catastrophic." The crowd turned to observe her, anticipating another revelation about misunderstood human customs or dietary preferences. "We are not the only research team currently studying humans." Professor Twiddleplonk dropped his ceremonial offering of energy drinks with a crash that echoed across the square. "What do you mean by that statement?" According to the Council's central database, there are presently 43 distinct research projects studying human civilization. The Department of Military Assessment believes you're all warriors. The Bureau of Nutritional Analysis has concluded you worship sandwiches. The Office of Transportation Studies determined that your primary recreational activity involves sitting motionless in vehicular traffic. The Department of Recreational Activities thinks you spend most of your time throwing spherical objects at each other. The Bureau of Architectural Studies believes you construct elaborate temples called shopping malls, where you engage in ritualistic combat over material possessions. The humans stared at each other in amazement mixed with existential dread. 43 different alien organizations had been studying them simultaneously, and they had all arrived at completely different and equally incorrect conclusions. "Wait," said Dr. Holloway, "are you telling me that somewhere in space right now there's an alien researcher composing a dissertation about how humans worship traffic jams?" "Most definitely," squeaked Binglefrump, who was now experiencing what appeared to be a panic attack of galactic proportions. The absurdity was overwhelming. Dozens of highly advanced alien civilizations, each possessing centuries of research and analysis capabilities, had created dozens of completely incorrect theories about human behavior and society. It was like a cosmic game of telephone played by extraordinarily intelligent beings who had never actually picked up the phone. Detective Martinez, who had been a police officer long enough to witness every conceivable variety of weirdness the universe could produce, found herself laughing despite the potentially serious implications of the situation. "So you're telling me that somewhere out there, aliens believe we're a species that worships sitting in traffic?" "The evidence is quite compelling," Professor Twiddleplonk said defensively. "Humans voluntarily assemble in large groups on transportation routes, remaining stationary for extended periods while producing ritualistic honking vocalizations. How else would any reasonable observer interpret such behavior? As the most frustrating part of our daily existence? But you continue engaging in this behavior every single day for your entire adult lives. Clearly it must possess some profound spiritual significance that transcends mere transportation." The logic was simultaneously flawless and completely wrong. It was like watching someone solve a complex mathematical equation using perfect arithmetic on entirely incorrect starting numbers. Dr. Holloway was furiously documenting everything on her mobile device. This was going to revolutionize her entire academic field. This is incredible. You've created a perfect demonstration of observer bias on a galactic scale. You've all been studying identical phenomena and reaching completely different conclusions because you're filtering everything through your own cultural assumptions and preconceptions. But we're scientists, protested Dr. Wobblebonk. We follow established scientific methodology. We maintain rigorous control groups. Your control groups consist of other members of your own species who share identical cultural biases, Holloway pointed out. You're not eliminating observer bias, you're institutionalizing and amplifying it. The aliens appeared to be experiencing something resembling intellectual system failure. The concept that their rigorous scientific methodology might be fundamentally flawed was more shocking than discovering that humans didn't actually worship fermented dairy products. But Binglefrump, bless his curious little pseudopods, was beginning to perceive the larger implications. So, if we've been systematically misunderstanding humans, and we employ identical methodologies to study every species in the galaxy, then you've probably been systematically misunderstanding everyone, Martinez finished, with the kind of satisfied realization that comes from watching a cosmic mystery solve itself. The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard the universe questioning its own existence. Ambassador Pumplebottom was the first to find his voice. So what you're telling me is that the entire foundation of intergalactic diplomacy, the basis for all our trade agreements and cultural treaties, the fundamental understanding upon which we've constructed our entire civilization, is systematically incorrect. Not incorrect, Dr. Holloway said gently, just profoundly incomplete. You've been attempting to understand everyone from the outside looking in, when genuine understanding requires acknowledging that you're on the outside and asking to come inside. But that's impossible. We can't experience every culture. We can't live every possible existence. No, but you can admit that you don't understand and ask for help. You can say, we don't know, can you help us figure this out? You can choose curiosity over certainty. That this represented a paradigm shift so fundamental that several aliens required immediate seating. The idea that ignorance could be more valuable than knowledge contradicted everything they had been taught throughout their extensive educations. But there was something beautiful about this revelation. If they didn't need to possess all the answers, if they could approach each new culture with genuine curiosity instead of predetermined conclusions, then perhaps they could actually learn something authentic and meaningful. The crowd had been listening to this conversation with growing fascination. The concept that an advanced alien civilization had been studying them for centuries while getting everything hilariously wrong was simultaneously insulting and oddly flattering. At least they were sufficiently interesting to merit study, even if the studying was completely incompetent. A teenager near the front of the crowd raised her hand with the confidence that only comes from being young enough to believe adults might actually have answers. Excuse me, Mr. Alien, can I ask you something? Binglefrump nodded eagerly, his translator making him sound like an enthusiastic chipmunk with excellent diction. What do your people do for fun? It was such a simple question, but it caused Binglefrump to freeze completely. In 900 years of studying other species, nobody had ever thought to ask what the researchers did when they weren't researching. He consulted his colleagues, who appeared equally baffled by this unprecedented line of inquiry. We conduct studies. But what do you do when you're not working? We prepare for future studies. The teenager looked genuinely disappointed. That's it? You don't have hobbies, games, art, music, stories? Well, there's competitive academic paper composition. That sounds absolutely miserable. And with that simple, honest assessment from a human teenager, the aliens suddenly realized something that 9 centuries of research had failed to reveal. They had created a civilization so obsessively focused on understanding others that they had completely forgotten to understand themselves. They had become professional observers who had lost touch with the simple pleasure of just existing. Dr. Holloway was practically bouncing with excitement. This is even more fascinating. You've created a species of professional observers who have become so focused on external analysis that you've lost connection with your own culture. You're like anthropologists who've forgotten they have their own lives to live. Professor Twiddleplonk looked stricken, But we're highly accomplished. We possess advanced degrees, we publish extensively, we attend conferences. When was the last time you did something purely because it brought you joy? Asked the teenager. The question hung in the air like a cosmic indictment. The aliens looked at each other, their various sensory organs blinking and quivering as they attempted to access memories that apparently didn't exist. "Define joy," said Ambassador Pomplebottom, with genuine uncertainty. And that's when the humans realized that they were the ones who needed to conduct some studying. These aliens, for all their advanced technology and centuries of academic research, had somehow created a civilization entirely devoid of joy, play, spontaneity, or the simple pleasure of doing things for no reason other than because they wanted to. "All right, that's enough," announced Detective Martinez, with the authority of someone who had spent 3 decades dealing with people who had lost their way. "School is now in session. You want to learn about humans, then you're going to learn about having fun." What followed was perhaps the strangest cultural exchange in the recorded history of interspecies relations. Humans began teaching aliens how to play. Not the ritualistic ceremonial activities the aliens had imagined based on their research, but genuine play. Silly, pointless, joyful, completely unnecessary play. Someone taught Binglefrump how to operate a yo-yo. He was spectacularly terrible at it, but his delighted laughter, when he finally managed to make it go up and down exactly once, was so infectious that it caused a chain reaction of spontaneous happiness throughout the crowd. Dr. Wobblebonk learned the art of taking selfies and became absolutely obsessed with finding the perfect angle to showcase her eye stalks. Professor Twiddleplonk discovered bubble wrap and spent the next 30 minutes popping it with the focused intensity of a Zen master achieving enlightenment through the destruction of small plastic air pockets. The aliens were experiencing something they had studied extensively in other species, but never personally understood: the simple, inexplicable joy of doing something for absolutely no reason other than because it felt good to do it. But the real revelation came when the humans started asking the aliens about their own cultures, their own lives, their own dreams and fears and hopes. Not their research, not their jobs, not their academic achievements, but their actual existence as conscious beings trying to figure out what it meant to be alive in an incomprehensible universe. It turned out that Binglefrump had always harbored secret dreams of becoming a poet, but had been discouraged because it wasn't considered practical or scientifically valuable. Dr. Wobblebonk had been secretly writing what could only be described as alien romance novels, featuring tentacled beings finding love across the vast distances of space. Ambassador Pomplebottom maintained a private collection of what appeared to be cosmic snow globes from every planet he had ever visited, each one containing a small piece of somewhere else that he found beautiful for reasons he couldn't explain and had never been encouraged to explore. They were just people, or whatever the universal equivalent of people might be, trying to figure things out, same as everyone else in the universe. As the impromptu street festival continued well into the evening, something wonderful and completely unexpected was happening. The artificial barriers between species, between observers and observed, between experts and subjects, were dissolving like sugar in rain. Everyone was just talking, sharing stories, learning from each other without trying to categorize or classify or understand completely. Dr. Holloway was interviewing aliens about their personal lives while they interviewed her about hers. Martinez was sharing police stories while learning about alien law enforcement techniques. The teenager who had asked about fun was teaching a group of junior researchers how to create friendship bracelets using colorful strings and patterns that somehow managed to transcend species barriers. And slowly, gradually, a completely new kind of understanding was emerging. Not the false certainty of academic analysis or the rigid classifications of scientific methodology, but the genuine connection that comes from recognizing shared confusion, shared curiosity, shared bewilderment at the magnificent absurdity of existence itself. But perhaps the most important moment in this entire cosmic comedy of errors came when Binglefrump approached Dr. Holloway with a question that would fundamentally change everything that followed. "Dr. Holloway," he said, his translator calibrated to maximum politeness and minimum squeaking, "would you be willing to accompany us to the council to help us figure out how to conduct this correctly?" Holloway looked around at the incredible scene unfolding in Times Square. Aliens and humans laughing together, sharing stories across the vast chasms of evolution and space and time, playing games that made no sense but somehow made perfect sense, creating connections that no amount of research could have predicted or explained. "You know what?" she said with a grin that could have powered a small space station. "I think you're already doing it correctly. You just didn't realize it. Because that's the fundamental truth about understanding. It doesn't emerge from studying or analyzing or categorizing from a safe distance. It comes from being present, being vulnerable, being willing to admit that you don't know everything, and that's not just okay. It's the only honest starting point for any genuine relationship." The Intergalactic Council had spent 9 centuries trying to decode humanity from the outside, when all they needed to do was knock on the door and ask if they could come inside. Not as researchers or analysts or experts armed with theories and classifications, but as confused beings seeking connection with other confused beings in a universe that seemed specifically designed to keep everyone perpetually baffled. And in the end, that's exactly what they became. Friends united by their shared confusion, but the story doesn't end there, because stories like this never really end. They just transform into something else entirely. 3 months later, the Intergalactic Council's Department of Xenobiology had undergone what could only be described as a complete philosophical renovation. Their new research methodology, developed in collaboration with human anthropologists, psychologists, and a surprisingly insightful teenager named Emma, who had become something of a celebrity among alien researchers, was based on a revolutionary principle. Start by admitting you don't know anything. The results were immediate and spectacular. Within weeks of implementing their new approach, they had established genuine diplomatic relations with 17 species they had previously classified as incomprehensible. It turned out that the crystalline entities of Rigel weren't actually a hive mind. They were just really good at harmonizing. The so-called aggressive plant people of Vega were actually incredibly shy and had been trying to give researchers flower bouquets the entire time. But their gifts kept being interpreted as attacks because, frankly, being handed a bouquet by a 12-foot-tall walking tree could be understandably startling. The Department of Military Assessment discovered that their warrior race of Alpha Centauri were actually professional athletes who had been trying to invite other species to join their intergalactic sports league for 300 years. The Bureau of Nutritional Analysis learned that the sandwich worshippers were actually just really good cooks who had been attempting to share recipes. It was, as Professor Twiddleplonk admitted during his TED Talk, yes, he gave a TED Talk, and yes, it went viral across 47 different worlds, the most embarrassing and simultaneously liberating experience in the history of xenobiology. But perhaps the most significant change came in the aliens themselves. Binglefrump had indeed become a poet, and his first collection, Confused Observations from a Small Being in a Large Universe, became a bestseller across multiple galaxies. Dr. Wobblebonk's romance novels, featuring characters from different species finding love through mutual incomprehension, had spawned an entire genre of interspecies romantic comedy. Ambassador Pomplebottom had opened a museum of cosmic snow globes that had become one of the most popular tourist destinations in the Council's territory. They had discovered something profound. When you stop trying to be an expert on everything, you become free to be curious about anything. Detective Martinez, meanwhile, had been promoted to Chief of Interspecies Relations for the NYPD, a position that had been created specifically for her after it became clear that alien visitors to Earth had increased by approximately 3,000%. Apparently, once word got out that humans were actually interesting to talk to, instead of just observe from a distance, Earth had become something of a tourist destination. Dr. Holloway had been appointed as the first human cultural liaison to the Intergalactic Council, a job that primarily involved helping alien researchers understand that just because humans did something didn't mean it had deep cultural significance. Sometimes people just did things because they felt like it, and that was perfectly valid. Emma, the teenager who had asked about fun, had become the youngest being ever appointed to the Council's advisory board on interspecies understanding. Her primary qualification was her ability to ask questions that made everyone realize they didn't know what they thought they knew. But the real transformation was happening throughout the galaxy itself. The Council's new approach to interspecies relations, based on curiosity rather than certainty, questions rather than conclusions, humility rather than expertise, was spreading like a cosmic virus of common sense. Species that had been isolated for millennia were suddenly discovering that they weren't alone in their confusion about existence. Civilizations that had considered themselves uniquely weird were finding out that everyone was uniquely weird in their own special ways. The universe, it turned out, was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined, and the strangest, most wonderful thing about it was that nobody really understood anybody else completely. And somehow, that was absolutely perfect. The Galactic Network News reported record levels of interspecies communication, cooperation, and what could only be described as cosmic friendship. Trade between worlds increased, not because of carefully negotiated treaties based on strategic analysis, but because beings were genuinely curious about what their neighbors were up to and wanted to share cool stuff they had made. Art became the universal language. Music transcended species barriers. Food brought everyone together because apparently the one thing all intelligent life forms had in common was an appreciation for delicious things to eat, even if they couldn't agree on what constituted delicious. The Department of Xenobiology was restructured and renamed the Department of Making Friends with People We Don't Understand Yet, and their success rate improved by approximately 8,000%. But perhaps the most beautiful moment came during the first annual Galactic Festival of Mutual Confusion, held simultaneously on 47 different worlds. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered not to demonstrate their knowledge or expertise, but to share their questions, their wonderings, their beautiful bewilderment at the magnificent mystery of existence. Binglefrump, now serving as the festival's coordinator, stood before the assembled beings and delivered what would become known as the most important speech in interspecies relations. "Friends," he said, his translator carrying his words across the cosmic distances to every world in the Confederation, "we have spent millennia trying to understand each other, and we have learned something profound. We don't understand each other. We probably never will, not completely. And that's not a failure. That's the beginning of every genuine friendship. The applause that followed was so enthusiastic that it registered on gravitational wave detectors throughout the galaxy. "We have discovered," he continued, "that the universe is not a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation to be joined. We are not problems to be analyzed, but stories to be shared. We are not data points to be classified, but friends to be made." And in that moment, something shifted in the cosmic conversation. The universe became a little less lonely, a little more connected, a little more willing to embrace the beautiful absurdity of conscious beings trying to figure out what consciousness even meant. The humans, watching from Earth as their planet became a hub of interspecies friendship and cultural exchange, couldn't help but laugh at the cosmic irony of it all. They had been studied for 9 centuries by beings who had gotten everything wrong, and in the process of correcting those misunderstandings, they had accidentally helped create the most successful period of interspecies cooperation in galactic history. Dr. Holloway, during her first address to the Galactic Assembly, summed it up perfectly. Turns out, the secret to understanding each other isn't understanding each other at all. It's being okay with not understanding each other and choosing to be friends anyway. The address was broadcast live across the galaxy and became the most watched speech in recorded history, surpassing even the famous "Why We Should All Stop Trying to Conquer Each Other and Start Sharing Recipes" address by the former warrior emperor of the Vegan star system. As the years passed, the galaxy settled into a new rhythm. Species continued to be baffled by each other, but now they celebrated that bafflement instead of trying to eliminate it. The Department of Making Friends with People We Don't Understand Yet published regular reports with titles like "Still Confused About the Crystalline Entities, but They Make Great Music," and "The Plant People Are Definitely Trying to Feed Us. We Just Can't Figure Out How to Eat Sunlight." And every year, on the anniversary of first contact in Times Square, beings from across the galaxy would gather to celebrate the festival of getting everything wrong and learning to be okay with it. There would be interpretive dance, still terrible, alien cuisine getting better, and speeches about the beauty of mutual incomprehension. The festival's motto, suggested by Emma and adopted unanimously by the Galactic Assembly, was printed on banners in 700 different languages. Nobody knows what they're doing, and that's perfectly fine. Ambassador Pomplebottom, now serving as the Director of Cosmic Cultural Exchange, would always conclude the festival with the same words. "We came here looking for answers, and instead we found something much better. We found each other." And every year, the universe would pause for just a moment to appreciate the beautiful impossibility of conscious beings scattered across infinite distances, speaking different languages, living in radically different environments, possessing completely different biology, and somehow managing to be friends anyway. The Intergalactic Council's original report on humanity was eventually published as a historical document titled "How to Study a Species for 9 Centuries and Learn Absolutely Nothing, a Comprehensive Guide to Academic Overconfidence." It became required reading in xenobiology programs throughout the galaxy, not as an example of how to conduct research, but as a reminder of what happens when you forget that the beings you're studying are actually, beings. Professor Twiddleplonk, now Professor Emeritus of Asking Better Questions, would often tell his students, "The day we stopped trying to understand humans was the day we finally started understanding what understanding actually means." And in the end, that was the most important discovery of all. Understanding isn't about knowing everything about someone else. It's about knowing that you don't know everything and being curious and kind anyway. The universe had become a more interesting place, not because anyone had figured it out, but because everyone had stopped pretending they had it figured out. And somewhere in Times Square, there's still a small plaque that reads, "On this spot, The galaxy learned that the best research methodology is admitting you have no idea what you're doing and asking if anyone wants to be friends. It's been voted the most accurate historical marker in human history, which, considering humanity's relationship with accuracy, is probably the highest compliment they could give. The cosmos, it turns out, has a sense of humor. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully on quiet nights, when the universe feels particularly pleased with itself, you can hear it laughing at the beautiful absurdity of beings who spent 900 years studying each other and discovered that the most important thing they could learn was how to stop studying and start living. In a universe where intelligent species could study each other for centuries and conclude that one group worshipped triangular snack foods while another engaged in ritualistic traffic appreciation, perhaps the only reasonable response was laughter, friendship, and the recognition that everyone, everywhere, was just making it up as they went along. And that, surprisingly, was exactly as it should be.